Welcome to Hardcap, the Skyd Magazine recap show. It is day 2 of the 2011 USA Ultimate College Championships out here in Boulder, Colorado. And we have our usual suspects of reporters here for the show. Adam Lehman, Kip Carlton, Brian Jones, and Zach Smith. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do is start with a discussion of the women's division and then move on to open. So in the women's division, we've gone through pre-quarters and now we know what the quarters matchups are looking like. In pool play, we had quite a mess, it looked like. So Adam, what were some of the games that you were focusing on, and what are some of the significant points of today's play?
So I think let's look at the pre-quarterfinal matchups and just talk about what each of those teams had to do to end up where they were advancing as far as the pre-quarters. So the first matchup was UNC against Cal, and UNC went into the last round against Ottawa in a situation where they had to win, and they had to win by at least 2 points to be sure of advancing. They were playing Ottawa, a team that had looked pretty good all through the weekend, and they just completely blew them out and just ran away with that game and ended up winning. I'm not sure what the final was, but they were up 12-3 at one point, and I think it didn't get significantly closer than that, 15-5. So they ended up, that big win jumped them up to the top of their pool, and they were facing off against Cal. Cal had a slightly easier or less complicated situation. They were playing UBC in their last pool play game, and those teams both had beat the 5 seeds. They both had lost the 1 seed and the 4 seed, Colorado College, and that meant that the winner of that game was in and the loser was out. So Cal won that game. They won big, I think 15-4. And so big win over UBC and advanced to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, they ended up shutting out UBC in the second half, if that was the actual final score.
Okay, so second matchup was UNC Wilmington against Carleton. Wilmington had looked pretty strong all weekend, but they went up against the Colorado College team that I think pretty much everyone has underestimated and wasn't expecting to be quite as good as they actually have been. And so after Colorado College won that game, that dropped UNC Wilmington down to the 2 seed, and so that's why they were playing the pre-quarters. Carleton had maybe the most interesting scenario of all the teams, that they dropped a game to the 5 seed Florida, and that meant that they only had 1 win heading into their last game against Oregon. So it ended up being scenario where Oregon had already clinched the pool just because Carleton lost to Florida. So Oregon didn't have a whole lot to play for, and Carleton ended up with a pretty big win over Oregon. Even with that win, they needed some help. They needed UNC to win by at least 5 and over Ottawa, and UNC won by 10. So that was what happened for them to get into the pre-quarters.
Right. Did you watch that UNCW Colorado College game?
I did not see any of that game.
Okay. Did you hear anything about how it went?
Not really, no.
So, on the other side, in Pool D, we ended up having Washington come out of it, as well as Stanford. Did you watch much Element this week, man?
I saw
today.
I saw the UW Stanford game first thing this morning, and that was a really tight game. They were tight the whole way, and Stanford ended up winning that game right at Hardcap. UW had a really, really effective jump zone that Stanford could do absolutely nothing against. And I mean, they weren't even able to punt it effectively against it. And UW was completely shutting down any offense at all whenever they were running that. The game went to Hardcap. Stanford scored to go. What was the final there?
Stanford, Washington. 14-10. Excuse me. Stanford, Washington is what we're looking at. 12-11.
12-11. So at 12-10, Stanford scored to go up 2, and there was about 2 minutes left in the hard cap. and Stanford still had a timeout remaining, so they took their last timeout there. And instead of UW maybe having a chance to catch a pull and throw a huck and maybe get a chance to come back and win the game, Hardcap went during the timeout, and that was game over. So UW scored that last point. It wasn't a universe point win, but there didn't seem to be a whole lot separating the two teams.
Unless you have other pool play games to talk about, let's jump to pre-quarters and look at the notable games there. What were you watching?
I started off at UNC Wilmington Carleton, and I watched the first half of that game, and it wasn't a particularly good game. UNC Wilmington was running a four-man cup, and it was windy enough that Carleton just couldn't do anything about it. Wilmington absolutely rolled them in the first half. They took half 8-2. Carleton fought back a bit. I think they got it to 11-8, 12-9, somewhere around there, before Wilmington pulled away and won 14-9.
Okay. So, what other games were you then watching that were more interesting?
I saw a little bit of UW and Michigan. They were back and forth the whole way in the second half until the last few points. They were trading from halftime all the way to 11-11, and then Michigan put in their own point, got 2 breaks in a row to go up 14-11, and from then on
Ended up winning 15-12.
15-12, traded out the last 2 points.
Did you watch Iowa State at all? I know that we were discussing that's been a matchup this season where both teams have had wins.
Yeah, so I think this wasn't particularly close. Iowa was up pretty big to start out, and they stayed up with a comfortable margin pretty much the entire game. It looked like there was quite a lot of zone being played in this game. So Iowa took half 8-4 and went on to win 15-11.
Okay. So the last game, I guess, on that list is then North Carolina Cal. So
Yep.
already addressed that.
So and this was another game that was tight most of the way through. I think 8-7 at halftime, and then UNC got a couple breaks, pulled away to win 13-9.
Okay. So what would be the quarterfinal games to look out for tomorrow?
I think probably the biggest game is going to be UNC Wilmington against Stanford. That's the game that I think has the most potential to be really tight and a really entertaining game. That you have contrasting styles. UNC Wilmington playing a vert stack, Stanford playing post stack. Stanford's shown a really effective clam against the vert. They showed against UW, and I'd be interested to see if sticking a defender on the break side, if that can do anything to stop Wilmington's breaks, because from what I've seen so far when they're playing against the man defense, the breaks are just like there's no mark almost a lot of the time.
Any other games?
Iowa, Oregon. We talked to Lou Burris earlier about how he matched up against Anne Mercier of Ottawa, and Mercier plays from a handler position. She was playing from a handler position all weekend. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of a game plan he has to try and contain Robin Fennig, since she's been playing a little bit more from a downfield position. All these games are really going to be pretty interesting, I think. UNC against UCSB, I think we didn't expect Northwestern to beat UCSB. Northwestern hasn't quite had the season to put them as an elite team, and UCSB absolutely earned the 1 seed for this tournament. That ended up not affecting the pool position, but it's possible that UCSB might be a little bit vulnerable. Carolyn Finney, I think, hyperextended her elbow at regionals. She said she's fine, she's been playing, but she was icing her elbow after the first game she played this weekend. So if she's not playing at 100%, it may be enough that Lila Tunnell and UNC, who've had a couple of good wins today, they can come through and win that game. And the last game is Michigan against Colorado College, and there you have two teams that have never seen each other, I don't think, and I think we don't really have much of an idea how those two teams are going to match up.
I guess all we can assume is that Colorado College is going to be able to punch another one through, as they've been upsetting everybody this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Warhead did Warheads pick Colorado College to go to the women's final?
On the open side, they picked them in the final, but I don't think.
But they're hating on the Colorado College women.
I guess so. I'm not sure.
Shame on you, Warheads.
Warheads, 2011 sponsor of the UFC Ultimate Championship.
Just for the record, my bracket heading in for the women's kind of failed pretty spectacularly. I had Ottawa advancing to the final, and they didn't even make pre-quarters. And I had UBC in the semis as well, and they lost. Or I guess they didn't make pre-quarters either. So
there you go. I have a feeling there are a lot of messed up brackets after today and yesterday's play. Kip, have you been watching any of the women's games? Anything else to note and add in the women's division?
I think the story tomorrow is two games. Laramie touched on this a bit. The UNCW Stanford game and the Iowa Oregon game are very much two games where the two styles of play from each team are very contrasting. Iowa relies a lot on a couple of star players, even though they do have a very talented team. Oregon is known as being talented all around. Oregon seemed like they were sitting a couple of their starters in their last game against Carleton, the last pool play game. It's interesting because they don't have a game till pretty late in the day. Well, no, actually they're playing at 8:30 tomorrow morning. So, and the same can be said for the UNC Wilmington-Stanford game. UNC Wilmington has some players that play big. They're great athletes. Stanford is kind of, Laramie touched on this yesterday, the faceless Army. There's a lot of just really solid players. But UNCW is able to go out and make these huge hucks and make huge plays, and that's big Ds.
And I'd say other than maybe Oregon, those two teams, if you look at like the 4, 5, 6, 7 players on the field, those teams probably have the most depth for their starters on the field for whoever they're going to be playing.
Okay, briefly, before we move on to the Open Division, let's look at picks for quarterfinals. Who's making it through?
So I'm going to go with UCSB over UNC. I'm going to go with Wilmington pulling the upset over Stanford.
Okay.
And then I'll go with Colorado College over Michigan. I still haven't really seen much of Colorado College this weekend. I'll just go with they've been winning. They beat some good teams, and they'll be rested as well. Michigan had some tough games today. Their game with UW was a battle, and Colorado College has been gone home eating dinner. They've been resting up. And then Oregon, Iowa. I've got to think that Oregon's going to come up fired out. Come
On fire. They're going to be smoking.
Fired up.
They're going to be smoking.
After their loss to Carleton this afternoon. Again, playing that one fewer game, and if they were really just resting players against Carleton, they played basically one game they had to win, one real game today. So I'd say that's going to make a difference. Iowa runs a slightly tighter rotation, and I talked to a couple of their players, and they said they are a little bit aware of the altitude as the points drag on and you get the longer points, that they are feeling that a little bit. And I feel like Oregon's a deeper team, and they are taking them.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I would have to. The UCSB UNC game is tough. I think that UNC goes into the game having just won, in dominating fashion versus a very good Ottawa team. So that I think I'll go with UCSB. They have the experience. They have a very good season behind them, beating very good teams.
Last year's runner-up.
Yeah. And then UNCW, I think, over Stanford. I saw a couple 60-yard hucks from UNCW upwind today. That's a good thing to have in the women's division and come quarterfinals. Then Colorado College. If there's a team that's a Cinderella team at this tournament, it's Colorado College, and I don't want to pick against them, and I think they can do it too. And then Oregon as well. I think Oregon's really deep. They rested some players today. They have Lee Burris, the mastermind. I think that they'll take it.
All right. Adam Lim, you got it.
So I guess going back to the Cinderella, that our teams in the quarterfinals, that we have all 1 seeds and 2 seeds, except for that Colorado College. That everything else has pretty much gone to seed. The only thing was Michigan and Iowa both won their pre-quarters from the third place rather than second, so they those two pools were just split with each other. And other than that, we've got pretty much, if you went all chalk with your brackets, you're probably looking pretty good right now on the women's side.
All right. Well, thanks a bunch, guys. Adam Lehrman and Kip Carlton covering the women's division at the championship this weekend. And now we're going to shift over to the No Look Scuba crew, Brian Jones and Zach Smith. So, guys, hey, not much. We're having a show. So, tell me, what were the games that you watched today that were big, that were really important to advanced teams? What was exciting? What did you see?
Well, one of the games we didn't really get a chance to talk about today that was one of importance was Texas-Stanford. And Stanford pulled out a Universe Point win. I got to see only the last point of the game, but it was enough to see how important it was. Ryan Thompson came up with a layout D on the goal line and then dished it for the score. And the surprise team right now is Stanford in the quarterfinals. So I think that was vitally important.
And they came out beating San Diego State, who is also a very strong team.
Yeah, they were.
Region.
Yeah, San Diego State was a top 10 team for most of the season, and a lot of people thought that them and Santa Cruz would be coming out of the Southwest, and Stanford turned out to be the one coming out.
I didn't really get to see this game, unfortunately, because I was covering a different game, but I think one of the major important games in Pool A was the Iowa-Colorado College game. This was the third round of the day, and Iowa was 3-0, having already clinched the pool. And most teams in this situation decided to, as Adam was saying, decided to rest starters and give rest and prepare for the next day. Iowa sat, I heard 2 or 3 of their good players, but went pretty normal. They did open up lines, but most of their players were playing, most of their starters were playing, and they beat Colorado College. And that kind of clinched the deal and knocked Colorado College out.
Right.
So a game that Colorado College might have been like, Iowa's going to take it easy on us. Let's go out and take this game and still be in contention. That was the total opposite thing of what happened. And another really important game, Brian, you could probably recap this better, was the Tufts-Illinois game.
Yeah, Tufts, I wasn't really necessarily watching all the plays on that, but Tufts came in that game they were down 6 points in point differential. So even if they had won that game, they had to make sure they did it by 7 points in order to get in. And it came down to it where they were up 9-3 going into the second half, so I was keeping my eye on it real close. And finally they got up, I believe, 13-7 and finally broke through at 14-7 right at the end. And it's kind of surreal to go over after Illinois scores to make it 14-8 to know that this is a universe point essentially for the season for Tufts at that point in time. And they delivered. They came through and went into a quarterfinal, pre-quarters game because of it.
Before we touch on pre-quarters, I'm just curious, who are some of the losers out of pool play?
You're looking at Florida as the biggest
loser.
The biggest
saving the
loser.
best for last.
Yeah.
Florida, a team that I picked Wisconsin to win the pool, but I was shocked to really see Florida come out today. I thought after yesterday's disappointing losses, they would come out and pretty much dominate, especially a team like Washington, which I didn't have too high of an opinion of. I thought Florida would be able to kind of handle and cruise easily, get into pre-quarters and give themselves a shot at the bracket. But Washington came out in the second half, especially against Florida, in pool play, and was very consistent in offense, led by Phil Murray, and they just kept scoring and scoring. And there was one quote by Washington that I overheard was saying, let's just walk this out, guys. They knew they only had to trade points against Florida to win, and Florida's defense wasn't that great. They were mentally and physically out of it. Washington moved on to the pre-quarters.
There you go.
Another team that I was kind of surprised to see them go was Virginia. The 3 seed out of Pool B. Basically, they kind of shot themselves in the foot yesterday when they lost to Stanford, and they lost pretty big. It was a pretty big blowout from the start. Virginia started giving Stanford plenty of chances on offense to score. Stanford runs a very slow and very consistent offense. They just patiently worked it up. You look up his name. One player in particular just completely took it over. Number 24 on Stanford, who is, pardon me, number 24 on Stanford, Colin Van Lang. If I pronounced it wrong, I apologize. He totally took over. He was definitely the crux of their offense, along with Ryan Thompson was very consistent.
And Nick Greenfield as well.
Yeah, they hugged it when they hugged it when it was the right person and the right thrower. And besides that, it was very, very consistent play. And they basically destroyed Virginia's mark. And that loss, besides the fact it was a loss against a lower seeded team, it was a big loss. So that if it was a tiebreaker, Virginia had 7 points to make up somewhere else. And Virginia had a tough schedule today, being the 3 seed. They had to play the 1 and 2 seeds of their pool. They lost to Colorado. I believe it was somewhat close. And then they lost to Oregon, and it wasn't close. They came out 4-1 Virginia. They were fired up. They were ready to go. And then Oregon battled back, and it seemed, just touch on Oregon for a second, it seems like Oregon's very comfortable in that scenario. They just did it in pre-quarters, and we'll get to that in a second. But Oregon feels pretty good battling back. They're a very emotional team, and it's very easy for them to get jacked up.
Yeah.
Virginia, on the other hand, is kind of the other side of the emotional spectrum. They really got down on themselves. You could see their sideline was just not really into it. And, I'm personally disappointed to see them go because I have a friend in Virginia. But it is, believe it or not, I find it very shocking, even though there are 3 seeds, to not see them go through.
And that Stanford win over Virginia propelled Stanford to an eventual win over Luther. So let's take a look at the pre-quarters a bit in some of those matchups. Did you guys watch the Stanford-Luther game much?
I got to watch a little bit of it, but just enough to know that Stanford's consistency was overpowering Luther's Hucks. And that was a game that Stanford went right up immediately. I think they were up 3-1 and never looked back in that game. And as a result, I ended up paying more attention to the other games later on. But Stanford just kept a nice lead of 4 or 5 points on Luther the entire time. And I believe it was a result of their consistency.
Okay. What about some of the other games? Oregon versus Washington was on the showcase field out here in Boulder. And it looked like Washington was up a little bit at the beginning, but Oregon battled back, as you guys have.
Yeah, absolutely. Washington was up pretty big early on. I believe it was 3-1. Oregon battled back. Washington took half, 8-7. But Oregon got, they were only down 1 break going into half. They were down 3. And Oregon, like I said, just felt really comfortable. It seemed like in the beginning they were still trying to figure out what they were doing. Dylan Freechild did not play. He definitely, from the center, there was definitely a lot of youth from the handler position. They had a lot of difficulty dumping and swinging, while Washington was effectively using the space of the field. Their forehands and their backhands were just space on the swings, and they were moving the disc really well. Towards the end of the game, Oregon started taking some more shots, going deep. Cody Bjorklund made some great plays, some good hucks. Camden number 22 on Oregon made a great layout catch in the back of the end zone. Really pivotal moment, I think, when Oregon took the lead. And, Washington started trying to match them in the deep game instead of working underneath. They started having some, Phil Murray started jacking it too far. Oregon defenders were getting to the disc if it floated. Okay. And the deep shots weren't working as well, even though it was pretty back-to-back in the end. And a few layout Ds on both sides. I think Oregon was just a little bit more athletic and possibly a little more lucky.
Interesting. I've noticed that Washington often relies on their short game, so their deep game may not be as practiced. And to see them start trying to go to that, that's evidence that Oregon was getting to them.
Yeah, and the conditions definitely helped. I don't think anyone here outside of maybe Carleton and Colorado are used to throwing in this weather yet.
Yeah.
Iowa maybe. Iowa might be used to it, and Pitt might be getting used to it. But from the start, those 2 teams have been fine.
So on the other side of the bracket, we've got Pitt over UBC. That's not as much of a surprise. The victory was given to UBC pretty handily.
Yeah, I thought that Pitt was going to win this game by 5. I was surprised that they won it by more. In my opinion, UBC just didn't have much left in the tank, especially with the John Norris injury. I mean, when you have someone go down, that's the crux of the offense, the centerpiece, like John Norris.
You guys both have used the word crux.
He's just
trying to copy.
It seemed a
that's
little
why
bit,
I switched to the centerpiece.
I'm still impressed. But it's just what I've seen.
But John Norris and Neely went over this earlier about how John Norris is still able to throw lefty and be a competent player. But it just changes the offense too much. And Pitt has been rolling today. I really like the way they played, and so they came out and dominated that game. And I don't know what the final score was, but they were up something like 13-2 at one point.
Final score was 15-7 Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
And what may have been the other close game of the pre-quarters was the Harvard Tufts game, regional matchup. And Brian, we enjoyed your excellent play-by-play from the fields.
Thank you. I have to use the word crux more often.
Yes.
So Yeah, Harvard Tufts. I thought that Harvard was going to pull away with this at the end, going into the game. They're the more talented team overall, no question. But this is what happens when you have two teams that have seen each other over and over again. And George Stubbs even said that Tufts has made his ultimate career. The rivalry with Tufts has been going back and forth for the years he's been at Harvard, and he really does look forward to it. He really does amp it up. And it's at that point it becomes, you know, your matchup. Go out and beat your man. And Harvard looked pretty good early. It looked like they were going to keep building on breaks. They got out to 2 breaks pretty early in the count, being up 6-4. And then going into the second half, Tufts just kept battling back. They didn't give up at all, and they ended up tying the game at 9s. And Harvard ended up going down, scoring at 10-9, and pulled to Tufts. And that sequence, there was a couple of turnovers going back and forth, and finally Devin Williams came up with an incredible poach D, where the Tufts guy looked like he was going to be wide open in the end zone, and that would have tied the game up and sent it to Universe Point. Instead, after a couple stoppages, I believe Andrew Vogt hit Devin Williams in the back of the end zone for about 60-yard huck. And Devin Williams had a fantastic game, and incredibly athletic player who's had also another fantastic tournament period.
So what are we seeing in quarterfinals tomorrow? And at that, what are your picks based on what you've seen this weekend?
So on the men's side, just like on the women's side, Oregon's facing off against Iowa. And I thought it was a really, really big point by Adam and Kip, where they were saying that Iowa had a few playmakers, and Oregon was kind of like, they were really deep. And in the men's side, it's kind of the exact opposite, where Cordy Bjorklund, and if Dylan Freechild plays tomorrow, I saw him walking around today, Oregon's more about the playmakers. Their depth got a lot of experience today, and they might be amped up to play tomorrow. But Iowa is such a deep team. There's so many good players in that team. While they are topped off by Sean Parker, Tyler Glenn, and Sergey, they definitely have a great, second tier, if you even want to call them a second tier. They're stacked with talent, and they're really high on themselves right now. They won all 4 pool play games. They beat out a very good Colorado College team when they didn't have to play them. So I think they're feeling really good about themselves, and these conditions favor the North Central. All 4 North Central teams made at least the pre-quarters, and 3 of them are in the quarterfinals with byes. So,
do you think the mentality, this is sort of a wider scope of these two teams meeting? Oregon has historically been a very strong team, whereas Iowa hasn't necessarily been competing with these teams on this level. Do you think that's going to play into Iowa's mentality at all going into that game?
I would say so normally, but I gotta wonder if Iowa ends up going to the semis tomorrow, and we look back on this next year after recapping, is the Iowa Cut game at regionals going to be the turning point for them? I mean, that's the first time in my memory in the recent years that they've beaten a legitimate contender, and so to come out and be able to do that must give them confidence. And I can imagine that they're not going to be fearful at all going into this Oregon game.
So we've also got Stanford Cut further in the bracket. Actually, let's back up and why don't you guys give me your predictions, the final word on who you think is making it through that first game.
This is the toughest game for me to predict.
absolutely, I completely agree with you.
Start with dessert, guys.
Yeah, I know. I have to say I'm going to go with Oregon here. I do. It's funny because
You bastard.
Yeah. I haven't been very high on them because, in my opinion, they play too fast and loose. But they're kind of going up against a similar team that beat Pitt on just throwing up hucks and hoping for the best. And Iowa has playmakers. Oregon has playmakers. This might be one of the most exciting quarterfinals in terms of just plays made. I don't know if it's going to be close at the end because if one team just starts connecting in hucks or the other. But I'm going to pick Oregon.
I'm a pretty big Iowa fan right now. Beating Pittsburgh, I kind of had a.
It's the Zelda jerseys, isn't it?
It's the Zelda jerseys. Yeah, it's got to be that. I'm gonna go with Iowa just to make it interesting. I do really like Oregon's style of play. I was rooting for them the whole way last year. I've been rooting for them the whole time this year. But I think Iowa's a really good team, and you brought up a really good point with the Iowa Cut matchup. If those two teams, they're right next to each other, if both those teams are able to win in quarterfinals, you got a North Central backdoor regional game in the semifinals of nationals, and everyone's been talking about the Cut Iowa game, and what a great way to come back to it.
Yeah.
At nationals and semifinals,
And it's
make it or break it right there.
It's probably going to be windy, so
yeah, and
might be in Iowa's favor.
Iowa has a little bit of a harder matchup. Actually, a much harder matchup. But I'm going to go with them. I think they're stacked with talent, and I think there's a lot of players that no one really knows about in Iowa that, their captain, Garrett Brander, is a fantastic thrower. And I think Iowa's going to be able to do it.
So looking down at the next game, we've got Stanford against the Cut, and although this might be chalked up as a easy game for Carleton, Stanford strikes me as a team that has similar style to Carleton. They both use very precise throws, good amount of in cuts and handler movement. Is this going to be an easy game for Cut, or is Stanford going to be able to prove something here?
I don't think I wouldn't really say the word easy. They're definitely going to. I think they're definitely going to win by a bunch. And the reason why I don't want to say the word easy is because I've never really seen Carleton kind of play down to a team. I was watching them a little bit yesterday and watching them today, and it seemed like it was the same thing both times. Carleton is very athletic. They run. When you watch them, you can see how hard they run, and it's such a difference between them and so many other teams. Stanford runs a very consistent style of offense, but I find at least when I was watching the Virginia game, I found Stanford was able to get off resets pretty easily. Carleton has very physical marks. When they do get TMFs, it's usually because of that. And their style of play is super fast, super quick, and the disc flows really well. I don't think Stanford has the manpower to stop it. I don't think there's any. I really don't think there's many. If there are any Stanford players that could slow down any of the cut players, I don't think it's going to be very effective anyway. Grant is probably the fastest cutter in the nation.
Brian, do you concur?
I think Cut's going to kill Stanford. I sorry for Stanford. I just don't think they have the depth of talent.
Way to go making it here, yeah.
Yeah. It's in Stanford's right now. They got to be surprised with the tournament in terms of like coming all the way from the 18th seed to make it to quarters right now. But it's funny about Cut. I was thinking that you were talking about how they don't play down to teams. And for the Grant Lindsley interview when he said, "Oh yeah, we need to work on our offensive efficiency in a game where they had no turnovers in offense."
Yeah, no turnovers.
And so their focus is incredible, and that's one of the things Cut is known for, that team atmosphere of always focusing. And in the previews that Zach wrote and the answers we got when we interviewed him were, we're just, every team's important. Every team's good. We got to go out and face them all. So their mentality's good. I don't think they're going to play down to Stanford, and I think they're going to come out and roll in this game.
All right, 2 votes for Cut. And then we've got a good matchup in Harvard, Wisconsin. These guys have met a couple times this season.
Mm-hmm.
This might be the closest matchup of these quarters.
Yeah, it's going to be a close game. I don't know about the closest one, but Harvard I think Harvard's had the best of Wisconsin so far this year, and warm up and going to Easterns when I saw them. I think Harvard's more polished than Wisconsin in this regard. I like the way they run their offense a little bit better. Harvard's offense doesn't get broken as much, and Wisconsin relies more on their athleticism.
And they strike me as a team that's deeper athletically.
Mm-hmm.
Was this Wisconsin or Harvard?
Wisconsin
is definitely deeper
I would definitely
athletically.
agree with that. Yeah.
And so if it's one thing, if Stubbs has a bad game for Harvard, Wisconsin probably is going to come and win. And so that would be the story of the game, is how Stubbs plays. And talking with Josh McCarthy so far, he said Wisconsin wasn't going to be rooting for them in the pre-quarters because Stubbs has had his way with Wisconsin so far this year.
I think I definitely agree with Brian here. Watching Wisco play, the Luther game and the Florida game in particular, they seem to be able to make some great plays. But the reason why they're able to jump out to these big leads is because teams give them the disc, within 30 yards of the end zone, and Wisconsin punches it in with one throw. And I don't remember who said it, but it was a funny comment. It seems like no matter where they are on the field, Wisconsin likes to punch it in on one throw. So they'll huck it, and they have some great throwers. They have Daiyu Liu, and they have John Bergen, Ben Feldman. They have some great throwers and some wonderful receivers. But I think I agree with the fact that their offense just isn't as consistent. We have a scissor. So I really think Harvard. When I watched the Harvard Carleton game, Harvard, while they did get broken a few times, Harvard was way more consistent. And I think a really cool thing about Harvard is, everyone's talking about Stubbs, as they should be talking about Stubbs. But Andrew Vogt is a very, very talented thrower. He plays for Ironside. And I've noticed he's kind of been, a little off the first 2 days. He has had a bunch of kind of unforced turnovers. And I think, quarterfinals of nationals, he's going to start playing, I'm gonna give him some faith. I'm gonna say he's gonna play really well. And when he's doing well, last year watching him at nationals, he was one of the reasons why they beat Cut. They call him the Book. He's a great thrower, and he makes amazing decisions, and he's got a really good hammer.
Yep.
And I think, just really quick, two other players that deserve credit on Harvard are, besides Devin Williams, who made the game-saving play, Misha Herskew, not as well-known player, number 21 on Harvard. He's actually the one who sent it to Devin for the game winner. And Whit Virgin Downey, he's another handler. He's very, very consistent, and he also has some great deep shots. So I think Harvard, while they might not be as deep athletically, they have really good disc skills, and I don't expect them to get broken that much tomorrow.
So are you guys both in concurrence about Harvard over Wisco?
I think it's going to be tight, but I'm going to say Harvard.
Yeah, Harvard by 1 or 2.
Yeah, Wisco's going to make it one heck of a game.
Stubbs is going to either receive the game-winning pass or throw it, in my opinion.
Should be a scooper.
So when I said this Harvard-Wisconsin game was going to be a close one, the closest game, I actually meant this Pitt-Colorado game. Because not only is this going to be potentially a very close game, but this might be the most significant game for the Quarters.
This was my pick for the final of the national championship. So, I mean, I'm kind of happy in a way that it comes a little bit earlier. So now I get to see 2 finals in a way in my eyes. But Pitt, this game is going to be incredible. These 2 teams are going to raise the level of the game. It's going to be one of those like Roger Federer versus Rafael Nadal, where both teams come out, I think, and they just throw whatever they've got at them. And as a result of the competition, they actually raise their level of play. And I just, I want to go cover the quarterfinals games as much as possible tomorrow, but it's going to be hard. It's
going to be hard to walk away from this game.
It's going to be incredibly exciting, I think.
Both teams have great throwers, great receivers across the board. Pitt, on day 1, really didn't play to potential. I mean, they lost to a very good Iowa squad, but a lot of people thought Pittsburgh was going to walk through that one. Contrary to yesterday, Pitt played great today. Brian was telling me in the first round, Alex Thorne had like 7 or 8 assists.
Right.
He played ridiculously. And Colorado has some great players: Jack McShane, Matty Zemmel, Hilke Snyder, Hida Snyder. They're all really good.
Plus, they're at home and they know this atmosphere.
And that game is going to be. Unfortunately, it's not on the showcase field, but it's going to be a really loud game. I think Colorado's going to come out in full support. It's going to be huge. I'm going to go with Colorado. I had them winning the finals, and something that I want to point out. I had a cut Colorado final, and they are on the opposite sides of the bracket, so I'm very excited. This may actually work out for me, so we'll see.
Don't worry, it's not going to. Pitt has done well against Colorado in both games this season. Colorado was up huge on them, and Stanford Invite, and Pitt had not a last-minute comeback, because time doesn't matter in ultimate, but came back in the late stages of the game. Also at Easterns, it was a much different game where Pitt jumped out to a 2-break lead and just decided to trade. And Pitt seems ready after crushing UBC. This is the point where I picked Pitt because I thought if they were mentally ready, they were going to win this tournament. They were ready for it. The problems all season have been lapses in strategy, lapses in mental focus. At Easterns in the final, they just didn't put it together until the end against Florida, and then Florida got off this incredible pass to win the game. So I like Pitt when they know they have to win, and I think they're going to come out tomorrow and the talent's going to be incredible. Alex Thorne, Chris Berenborg, Tyler, hopefully I get this right, Girolamo.
That's right.
Holy
That's
cow.
actually right.
So this is going to be, as they say, a barn burner.
So it sounds like you're thinking that that early loss against Iowa may in fact be the best thing that could have happened to Pitt.
In some ways, it would have been, for now, I think the nemesis I was worried about was cut, because they hadn't been able to beat them this season. And they didn't run into them at Easterns after losing a tough game at Stanford, 15-8, I believe. So now, if they're going to see cut, they're going to see him in the finals. And as Zach Smith put it this morning, Pitt's been eliminated by cut the last 2 years, and it was in the quarters and then the semis last year. So
it'd be great if they got eliminated in the finals.
It's got to be the finals this year.
It's going to be the finals this year. So.
All right, we've got a vote for Colorado and a vote for Pitt, and there'll be a lot of exciting action tomorrow. We'll be broadcasting live, of course, on Skyd with our webcast and live blog. Thanks to Brian Jones, Zach Smith, and of course Kip Carlton and Adam Lehrman, our reporters live on the field. We'll have some more live play-by-play. Also, I know USAU.org will be doing semifinals and finals webcasting. So a lot to look forward to tomorrow and Monday.
Definitely.
Yep.
All right, this has been Elliot Trotter for Skyd Magazine.